You are looking at a dull grey rock, heavy, lifeless, easy to ignore. Most people would step over it without a second thought. A Roman administrator would see silver. A Roman engineer would see pipes. A Roman state would see power. This rock is called Galena. 2,000 years ago, Rome did not mine silver the way we imagine. It mined this. And when Galena was heated in furnaces across the empire, it paid soldiers, funded cities, and filled the air with something invisible and deadly. The smoke did not stay near the mines. It traveled across valleys, across cities, across oceans. The Romans noticed the sickness. They wrote about it. They warned about it. And yet, they kept going. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe, but only if you like this video and you want to see more of this. So what exactly was Galena? And did the Romans know it was deadly? Let's get into it. Galena is lead sulfide, a dense, brittle mineral with a metallic shine that breaks into perfect cubes when you crack it open. It looks like silver. It feels heavier than silver. And for the Romans, it was more valuable than silver on its own. Because Galena did not give Rome one material, it gave Rome two. When Galena was crushed and heated in clay furnaces, the sulfur burned off and lead melted. Inside that lead, locked at the atomic level, was silver. To separate it, Roman smelters used a process called cupellation. They heated lead in shallow clay cups called cupels and blew air across the surface. Lead oxidized into litharge, a yellowish crust that was scraped away. What remained at the bottom was a lump of pure silver. That silver became money. The denarius, Rome's standard coin, was struck from silver extracted this way. The Phoenicians had been smelting galena since around 1100 BCE. Rome industrialized the process. Smelters across Spain, Britain, Gaul, and the Balkans were running at full capacity, feeding silver into the Roman treasury. But here is the part most people miss. The silver was the prize, lead was the bonus, and Rome used every gram of it. Lead became pipes for the aqueducts that carried water into cities. It became roofing material, weights for trade, seals for amphorae, lining for baths. It went into ceramics, into painted glazes, into cosmetics. It was even boiled into grape juice in lead-lined pots to make a syrup called sapa, used as a sweetener and preservative across the empire. Pliny the Elder noted that in Britain, lead was so abundant near the surface that laws had to be passed to limit how much could be extracted. One rock, two supply chains, nothing wasted. Rome did not treat galena as a niche resource for specialist craftsmen. It treated galena the way it treated grain or roads, as infrastructure, as something the empire literally ran on. For every gram of silver produced from galena, roughly 10,000 grams of lead were produced alongside it. That is not a byproduct, that is an industrial output. Rome built its currency and its cities from the same rock, and it could not stop mining it without collapsing both. Now watch what happened when all of that lead hit the air. Every time a Roman furnace heated galena, silver was not the only thing that came out. Lead did too. Not as a solid you could see and collect, as a vapor, invisible, weightless, and carried by the wind. This was not a small operation. Rome ran smelting furnaces across Spain, Britain, Gaul, the Balkans, and beyond. Batteries of furnaces burning constantly, staffed by slaves, prisoners, and laborers, producing silver to feed the treasury and lead to build the infrastructure. And every single one of them was pumping it into the atmosphere. Here is what is remarkable. We do not have to guess about this, we can measure it. In Greenland and the Russian Arctic, ice has been accumulating in layers for over 130,000 years. Each year deposits a new layer, trapping whatever was in the atmosphere at the time: dust, pollen, volcanic ash, and pollutants. Scientists drill columns of ice as long as 3,400 meters and read them like tree rings, building a precise chemical record of the air over thousands of years. And when researchers at the Desert Research Institute analyzed 3 of these ice cores, the results matched Roman history almost exactly. When Rome was strong, lead levels were high. When Rome was at war, lead levels dropped. When the economy boomed during the Pax Romana, from 27 BCE to 180 CE, the smelters ran at full capacity and lead pollution in the Arctic reached levels 6 times higher than during the Phoenician period nearly 1,000 years earlier. Then the Antonine Plague hit in 165 CE and killed roughly 10% of the Roman population. The smelters went quiet, workers died, mines shut down, and lead in the ice collapsed to pre-Roman levels. It stayed there for 500 years. The pollution did not stay near the mines. It wafted northwest from Spain and Gaul, across Scotland and the Faroe Islands, settling into peat bogs and ice sheets thousands of miles from the nearest furnace. Lead isotopes in the ice confirmed the source. This was not natural. This was European mining and smelting. During the roughly 200-year height of the empire, Rome released more than 500 kilotons into the atmosphere, between 3 and 4 kilotons every single year. To put that in perspective, the world did not exceed those sustained levels of atmospheric lead pollution again until the High Middle Ages, over 1,000 years later. This was not local contamination. This was the first time in human history that a civilization altered the chemistry of the atmosphere on a continental scale. Rome did not just build an empire, it left a chemical fingerprint in the ice that we can still read 2,000 years later. The Romans knew lead was dangerous. Here is what most people get wrong about Rome and lead. They assumed the Romans were ignorant, that they had no idea what lead was doing to them, that they stumbled blindly into a poison they could not see or understand. That is not what happened. The Romans wrote about it across centuries, in detail. The earliest clear description of lead poisoning symptoms comes from a Greek poet named Nicander of Colophon, writing in the 2nd century BCE. In his didactic poem Alexipharmaca, a text about poisons and their antidotes, he described exactly what happens when someone swallows white lead: grey lines on the gums, hallucinations, exhaustion from what we now recognize as anemia. He also described the effects of lethargy, lead oxide left over from smelting, severe stomach pain, swollen limbs, inability to urinate, and a greyish colour to the skin. This was not vague, this was clinical. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, called cerussa, the white lead powder used in Roman cosmetics, a deadly poison. He also noted that black lead, when swallowed, was lethal in the same way as lethargy. He knew, he wrote it down, and he also recorded dozens of medical recipes that contained lead compounds for skin treatments, eye ointments, and other remedies. That is the contradiction. The architect Vitruvius went further. He directly warned against using lead pipes to carry drinking water. He observed that lead workers were pale and sickly, and he recommended earthenware pipes as the healthier alternative. He made the connection between the material and the illness. Dioscorides, the Greek physician whose medical encyclopedia was used across the empire, recommended lead-based medicines for external use while warning that taken internally, they were poisonous. Paulus of Aegina, compiling earlier medical knowledge, stated clearly that lead compounds, including white lead, lithargy, and metallic lead, were toxic when ingested. He described colic appearing across Italy and throughout the empire with symptoms that match what we now call lead poisoning. But he never connected the two. He described the disease, he described the poison. He never linked them, and that is the key. The understanding was real but shallow. A small circle of educated writers recognized that swallowing lead was dangerous, but the idea that lead could enter the body through the air, through the skin, through water running in lead pipes, through wine sweetened with lead-laced syrup, that was either not understood or simply ignored. There was no diagnosis, no name for the condition, no medical term for what lead was doing to the population. The word Satanism would not appear until the 19th century, so the Romans kept using it, not because they were stupid, because lead was cheap. Lead was everywhere. Lead worked. and there was nothing else that could do all of those things at the same cost. Rome did not ignore the danger out of ignorance. It accepted the danger because the empire could not function without lead. And that acceptance had a price. One the Romans could never have calculated, but that modern science now can. McConnell's team at the Desert Research Institute did not stop at measuring the pollution. They modelled what it did to the people who breathed it. Using historical climate data, including seasonal wind patterns and humidity, they reconstructed atmospheric lead concentrations across Europe during the Pax Romana. Then they applied modern epidemiological equations, the same ones used to measure the cognitive damage from lead-containing gasoline in the 20th century. The results were clear. Blood lead levels during the height of the empire were far higher than in the periods before or after it, and that excess exposure translated into cognitive decline, averaging 2.5 to 3 IQ points across the entire European population. That does not sound like much, but scale it. An IQ reduction of 2 to 3 points applied to tens of millions of people changes the shape of a civilization. It means fewer exceptional thinkers at the top, more people struggling at the margins, slower problem solving across every institution, every military unit, every administrative office. And near the mines it was worse. In regions like southern Spain, Gaul, Britain, and the eastern Adriatic, where smelting operations were concentrated, the exposure was significantly higher. The people who lived closest to the source of Rome's wealth paid the steepest cognitive price. An IQ reduction of 2 to 3 points does not sound like much, but when you apply that to essentially the entire European population, it is a big deal. Now here is something worth noting. Some scholars pushed back. Caleb Finch, a neuroscientist at the University of Southern California, pointed out that Roman productivity was at its peak exactly when lead production was highest. The empire was not collapsing under the weight of cognitive decline during the Pax Romana, it was thriving. And that is precisely the paradox that makes Galena so revealing. Rome was strong enough to absorb the damage. The systems worked well enough that even a population-wide cognitive deficit did not stop the economy, the military, or the administration from functioning. The cost was real, but it was invisible. Spread thin across millions of lives, never concentrated enough to trigger a crisis. That is the most dangerous kind of harm, the kind you can afford to ignore. If you want to understand Rome, do not start with its generals. Start with its materials. Galena tells you more about how Rome thought than any military campaign ever could, because Galena was not a weapon, it was a decision. And that decision reveals the operating logic of the entire empire. Silver from Galena paid the legions. Lead from Galena built the water systems that kept a city of over 1 million people alive. It sealed the containers that shipped grain and wine across the Mediterranean. At its peak, annual lead production reached as high as 80,000 tons. Rome did not drift into this level of output. It engineered it. And that is the point. Rome did not optimize for health. It optimized for endurance. It optimized for systems that could scale across 3 continents and hold together for centuries. Think about what Rome was actually managing. A currency that had to be trusted from Britain to Syria. A water network that had to deliver millions of litres daily to a city built on hills. A food supply that crossed oceans. A military that marched on bread, wine, and reliable logistics. Every one of those systems touched Galena. You could not run Rome on good intentions. You ran it on materials that worked, and lead worked. It was soft enough to shape into pipes, dense enough to seal containers, cheap enough to produce at scale, available everywhere the empire dug for silver. Was it dangerous? Yes. Did Rome care? Yes, in the way that an engineer cares about a known stress point in a bridge. You note it, you monitor it, and you keep driving traffic across it because the alternative is no bridge at all. This is not a modern judgment on Roman morality. This is a description of how civilizations operate when survival depends on systems, not on individuals. Rome chose function over safety, scale over caution, long-term stability over short-term harm. And for roughly 200 years during the Pax Romana, that choice worked. The economy ran, the legions marched, the cities grew, the aqueducts flowed, the coins circulated, all of it powered by a single mineral that gave Rome everything it needed and took back more than it could see. But the cost was accumulating, invisibly, in the bones, the blood, and the brains of every generation born under Roman skies. Galena was not an accident of history. It was a choice made at the civilizational level, repeated every single day the furnaces burned. Rome did not fall into lead poisoning. It walked in with open eyes and partial understanding, knowing something was wrong but unable to stop the machine it had built. This one mineral paid for armies, moved water, preserved food, and held together the largest system of governance the ancient world had ever seen. And it also shortened lives, damaged bodies, and filled the air with a poison that crossed continents. The warnings were written down, the sickness was observed, the alternatives were recommended, and none of it mattered. Because the empire ran on Galena. Shut down the mines and the silver stopped. Shut down the silver and the coins stopped. Shut down the coins and everything that depended on them, the military, the grain supply, the administration, collapsed with them. That is why Galena matters. Not because it killed Romans, but because it shows how empires actually work. They are not built on what is safe. They are built on what scales. And when a system grows large enough, the costs stop being personal. They become invisible, spread across millions of people, measured not in sudden death, but in slightly diminished minds, in children who grew up a little slower, in a population that never knew what it lost because the loss was never sharp enough to feel. Rome chose power, it chose permanence, it chose control, and it paid the price slowly, quietly, and across generations. A pollution signal so strong it is still frozen in Arctic ice 2,000 years later. We read that signal today and call it a warning. Rome read the same signs and called it the cost of doing business. So when you look at this rock, the question is not what it did to Rome. The question is whether we would have made a different choice. And honestly, look around. We burn fossil fuels we know are changing the climate. We use plastics we know are filling the oceans. Maybe the real lesson of Galena is not that Rome was blind. Maybe it is that empires always make the same choice. And that is the Roman way. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.